Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
There's nothing left in this old town. Pick up your life and move it around. And what is here for me in Tennessee? Pick up your rifle and make a stand. You always said I should be like that guy, but guess what? I'm telling you, I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. Who am I? I'm Andrew Jackson, and my life sucks in particular.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins, and we are here in New York's emo zone.
Now, I have absolutely no idea, Susan, what emo music is, but we can say that it is the driving force behind an exciting new show at the Public Theater about Andrew Jackson, the controversial 7th president. The show is called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson. It was written and directed by Alex Timbers with a fascinating new emo score by Michael Friedman. All right, for those of us who still play Jerry Herman cast albums, can you explain, Michael, what emo music is and why you think it works in the musical theater?
Basically, I like to think of it as kind of punk boys in their 20s whining about girls who wouldn't date them in high school and, feeling very, very, very sorry for themselves and very emotional and very sensitive.
And how would this make you think of putting it to the history of Andrew Jackson?
Well, it's funny, when we first started talking about writing a musical about Andrew Jackson, it's funny, the emo aspect was one of the first things we came up with, which was that Andrew Jackson was, strangely, for sort of a warrior president, he also really considered himself an outsider and was very sensitive to, that everyone was out to get him and that he was sort of alone and trying to make all these decisions for himself. And so he is kind of a whiny little boy.
He was also, as it relates to emo culture, he was a cutter. He and his wife would actually ritualistically bleed themselves.
And that's a major part of the show, as I guess you've
And people who write emo music, are they cutters as well, Michael?
not to put the words in anyone's mouth, but I think that's part of the emo culture is at times that people, it has been known that these people sometimes...
They actually carve, I mean, because I wondered in Andrew Jackson, you see him slice, whenever he's emotionally really disturbed, he gets released by slicing his hands.
To let the humors out.
Oh my God.
Why did you decide to write a show, which turned out to be great, about Andrew Jackson? Alex, this was your idea first, right?
Well, it was both our ideas.
Okay.
We were actually set up on this creative blind date by Kurt Deutsch, the writer producer, and we were thinking about, I was saying I would be really interested in doing something about emo culture and emo music, and to me, part of the thing that also makes it really sort of relevant right now is that as Michael was saying, it exists in this really interesting place in the sincerity-irony continuum that really feels like it riffs on, what's lovely about like The Daily Show and different things that are really popular right now. And Michael had taken a class in college on Andrew Jackson. He said, well, isn't Andrew Jackson kind of the ultimate emo president? And that was the springboard for the show.
But then specifically to what Andrew Jackson stood for, rather the controversy surrounding Andrew Jackson. This was a man who was really the first great populist in America, a man who expanded democracy, a man who stood up for the poor who had been ignored by the elites that founded the country, who took on the Bank of the United States, but at the same time who was a very rich slave owner and who forced the brutal resettlement of the Indians, which some historians call genocide.
Right.
How do those things, you feel, have relevance to the political debate today?
First of all, as you're saying, he's a completely morally complex person in the way that Jefferson and all these others were. But unlike Jefferson, he's one of us. He's the first president in the White House that reflects us as people. And he is the first in the line of these kind of really charming populists, these guys that just remind us of ourselves that we'd really like to be friends with. That whole line about, how Bush is the candidate I'd most like to have a beer with. And so when we were first doing the show, it felt to us like a commentary on Bush and Clinton and these guys.
Clinton I thought more of Clinton than I did of Bush of the fake kind of populist in a way.
Though when we started, I think, writing the show, it was 2006, and very much the questions of the W era were upon us. And I think also that Jackson's use of populism to for expansionist tendencies, which I think was very much under the W era, a kind of sort of renegotiating what that might mean. But it was true that we'd started, I think, from W, and then Clinton came in, and then weirdly it was sort of like, well, obviously he's like Reagan, who's probably the great populist of the post-war era. And then he's sort of like Jimmy Carter because he kind of comes from nothing, hard scrabble. And then as we've moved forward, what with the Obama candidacy and Yes We Can, which obviously took on a totally different meaning in grassroots populism, and then Sarah Palin's use of populism, and then even more recently the Tea Party. It's been kind of like every time we turn around, what Jackson's influence seems to be on American politics.
It's never gone away.
Everybody loves a front man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, though, because I think that the musical gets at this great historical tension that when you do unleash populism, you really don't know where it's going to end up. And today we've got the tea bags going on, which could be the people who followed Andrew Jackson, who are taking it to perhaps an extreme that even Sarah Palin might not have conceived of. You know, you don't know what you're going to wrought when you tap into the common man.
Yeah.
Well, the Tea Party slogan, "Take Back the Country," it was really interesting because then we're looking
already
at
in the show.
Michael's lyrics
Oh,
are
really?
all about, you know, taking back the country, making the country bleed, and all that stuff. It's fascinating.
Let me ask you, I know you wrote this in 2006 before the collapse of the economy, but you have been working on it all along.
Oh, yeah.
Jackson was famous for taking on the banks. That would seem to me to be a pretty big theme that you could have introduced in the show. But did you think about adding some stuff about his fight with the bank? 'Cause it's not in there now.
We have a moment where he does, in the Washington scene, he pretty quickly takes care of the banks. There's basically, Van Buren comes in and tells him the bank's out to get him, and he says, we'll take it down. Yeah. And Van Buren says, we can. He says, well, I just did. And the thing about that is, he did take on the banks, which now we think of as taking on Wall Street's greed. But actually what he did was he took on the National Bank, which is more like taking on the Treasury.
The Treasury, yeah.
And so basically he actually probably crippled our financial system for like ever. It's like it didn't, most of the following two depressions were pretty much because he had taken down the bank. So
last question about your fun-filled musical. Andrew Jackson, American Hitler, yes or no?
Oh wow! I think the show makes. Hopefully, I think what's interesting is he's had a huge reappraisal over the last 15 years. When I was in high school, you know, he was this great hero. Then we were doing in L.A. the place that would not exist were it not for Andrew Jackson's expansion. You know, the kids come in and they're like, you know, we can't believe you're doing a show about this guy. He's a terrible human being. So I mean, the hope is to have us in our somewhat like breezy manner, to have a somewhat more
emo
like
breezy.
emo breezy, yeah, heavy light, morally complex
everybody
portrait.
loves.
That's right.
Yeah, have a somewhat morally complex portrait that you can make a decision.
What he allowed to happen, what he allowed or brought about, really Van Buren then carried out his policies when he was president, but what Jackson allowed to happen, I think, to the indigenous population of the Americas is sort of astonishing in its scope and horrifying in its scope. And I think the thing that we're more interested maybe in the show is our responsibility as a people and as a country for what happened and for what we allow our leaders to do.
You know, you could have a whole series here of emo musicals about presidents. The emo Grover Cleveland musical could
Emo
be next.
Grover Cleveland,
Will you
that's a
push
good
this?
idea.
Will you
Emo
push
Grover
this
Cleveland.
this style?
Yes, emo Nixon. How's that?
He would be perfect. He is the
really
classic
is,
emo.
yeah,
I don't know if he and Pat cut themselves, but he's certainly the classic emo president.
What's next? What are you working on?
I'm doing Pee Wee Herman show, which will be in New York, and then
Wait, that's really with Pee Wee Herman?
Pee Wee Herman. We
You
did out
come
in
here
LA.
with him.
Yeah, he's
Let's
great.
promise.
Yeah, he would.
Oh,
I'm sure he
Rubens.
would love to
Oh,
meet you.
please.
And you, Michael, what are you working on?
I'm working on a musical about the adult film industry, about porn. So I've been hanging out on porn sets in the San Fernando
Oh, too bad for you.
Yeah,
It's really something.
Yeah, I know that old
Weird.
trick. All right, Michael Friedman, the composer and lyricist of Bloody, Bloody Andrew Jackson, and Alex Timbers, who wrote and directed this very fine production of the Public Theater. Thank you for being our guests tonight on Theater Talk.
Andrew Bloody Jackson, opening night party, and we're here for Theater Talk.
Did you say Andrew Bloody Jackson?
The show's about a president as a pop star. What pop star now would you like to see run for office?
I'd love to see Lady Gaga run for president.
Lady Gaga, obviously.
I feel like anybody who can have the vision to wear no pants can have the vision to lead me and my country.
Who'd be the opening act for the Andrew Jackson World Tour?
I don't know, the Green Day musical.
So if Andrew Jackson were to apply to live in your co-op, would you accept him in your co-op or would you deny him in your co-op?
I think you got to accept a guy that good looking. He adds street cred to the co-op. The bullet holes you can patch up. The horse you can clean up.
Considering the fact that all of his homes were consistently burned down or like torn down by people, I think the answer would have to be no.
The age of Jackson, the age of, this is the age of Jackson.
I was in London recently to cover the opening of Love Never Dies, the sequel to Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera. And when I picked up the papers the day after the show opened, every single critic referred to a label that has been attached to the show. It is now called Paint Never Dries, which tells you all you need to know about Love Never Dies. That phrase that has gone round the world was created by the West End Whingers, who have become a huge force in the London theater. They are passing through New York now to take some shots at some of Broadway's latest shows, and they've stopped by to visit us here at Theater Talk. So I want to welcome the West End Whingers, Andrew and Phil. Hello. We do not give last names, right? No. And why is that? So people won't find you and kill you?
Not very interesting, really. Not very boring names.
And they've come with someone whose last name we can give. A great friend of mine, Mark Shenton, very influential in London theater himself, as the critic for the Sunday Express, The Stage, and Playbill.com's London correspondent. Welcome, Mark.
Hi.
All right, guys. I've got to ask you, paint never dries. Has it changed your lives since you came up with that line?
It was quite a shock, I think.
What happened?
Well, it's just I was sitting there, blogging away on the Tuesday, the day it opened, and they were previewing a news item on lunchtime news, and they used Paint Never Dries. I immediately sort of looked up, and then during the report on the opening, they used it again, and then it seemed every news bulletin that day on every channel were using it.
Now, who came up with that line? Because you guys write together, right?
Yeah, it was him. It's his fault.
Right,
if Andrew Lloyd Webber's watching, he's the one you want to put the
That's why I don't use my surname, because I'm in the telephone directory. Yeah.
So you went to a fairly early preview of Love Never Dies.
No, it was a week in, and they only did 2 weeks of previews, so I think we were pretty fair.
Gave him a chance.
And you were sitting there, and did the line occur to you while you were watching it, or while you left, or at the bar later?
Afterwards, when we were writing it up, yeah. I mean, it was like watching paint dry. We were bored, and I think that's the one thing. We'll go and see anything. As long as we're not bored, we're going to be fairly happy. But when you're looking at your watch, and what was the line about time passing or something, and you just think, it's not passing. Yeah.
It's been 30 seconds since I set my watch.
Mark, how you're new media because you blog, but you're also old media. How influential have the West End Whingers become in the London theatre scene with their early reviews of shows?
Well, I think the world has definitely changed, as you say, and one of the things is that the timetable has changed. Just as you can't stop the word getting out in New York, thanks to things like All That Chat. In London, there are bulletin boards, but they're not nearly as influential as All That Chat. I mean, there's one bulletin board that everybody reads in London in the same way as here. But one thing we do, and everybody does in London, is the moment the West End Whingers publish a review, everybody's onto it. Now, that's slightly frustrating for the conventional critics, who of course...
they're putting you out to pasture, my friend.
Well, indeed, we're well aware that that's happening anyway. Yes, but the point is that these guys get ahead of the game, because they buy their tickets, and therefore are entitled to do so. I mean, there's no embargo for them, whereas we, of course, are embargoed by the hospitality we're extended. And there's a protocol for the way we work, which there isn't for these guys. Of course, what's interesting is that as the landscape is changing, the establishment are beginning to realise this, and they're co-opting them.
Yes.
And they're actually inviting them now to press nights.
Do you feel that there's now a deliberate deliberate attempt on the part of West End producers to try to bring you guys into the fold so they can control your time?
Some of them, because they can slow us down because we can't get ahead of the game.
Do you accept these invitations?
Oh yeah, so it costs a fortune to go to the cinema. It does actually, but it costs even more to go to the theatre in London. And if we can get to see shows for free, we don't mind waiting for the embargo to.
But then that's going to undermine the power that you've...
It does weaken us. Yeah, it would have certainly with... I was going to say paint never dries. I can't say that.
Everybody calls it paint never dries now.
Yeah. The thing is that these guys have begun to get an authoritative voice. I mean, for better or for worse, whether or not you agree with them, you begin to know... we know who they are. We know what they like and what they don't like. So you've got something to judge against. The average blogger, of course, you have no idea who they are.
But how did you get this notoriety?
Because partly it's also the fact that they write so much and they've seen so much. They
so
do,
long.
And they've been doing it for 4 years.
It's not an overnight success.
No.
The paying of the bride.
And the money's
That's the one good gag we've come up with in 4 years.
Fate never tries, and the money's rolling in. Can I ask you, who are you guys? Phil, what do you do when you're not a West End Whinger? How do you make a living?
I'm an illustrator, freelance illustrator.
Really?
Yeah.
For
you sound surprised.
I
look like a rock star.
And Andrew, what do you do to make a living?
Well, that's a complicated story. The short version is I used to work in publishing, and I actually took voluntary redundancy last year because I just needed a change. So at the moment I'm building a couple of projects which I can't really talk about at the moment.
Well, what got you going? What made you think, we should go and have reviews about all this place?
That question.
Picture at the Apollo Theatre 4 years ago. Fool for Love.
With Juliette Lewis. Was it 5 stars in Time Out?
Well, 6 stars, because they used to have a 6-star rating, didn't they, in those days, just to confuse everybody. And I think we paid decent amount of money to go and see this, and it was just rubbish, wasn't it? Yeah. It was just rubbish, and it was like the 3rd rubbish thing in a row that we'd been to see, and we were in a pub afterwards and just complaining to each other about it and moaning, and then we just sort of had this idea that rather than depressing each other, we should just moan outwardly to the world. And
well, Andrew actually said we should do a blog, and I said, "What's a blog?"
So you went home, turned on the computer, fired it up, and how did you come up with the West End Whingers? And what is whinging? Is not a term
that was me again. Wasn't
that
it?
was he's the creative one.
Well, I'm not really.
I'm
Andrew's the talented one. I'm just the one who comes out with the sound bites because it just saves time, really.
And whinging means it's
complaining,
not a term we have.
whining.
Complaining,
Don't you have
whining.
whinging?
No, we don't really have whinging.
You do
kvetching, yeah.
Kvetching. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, well, that's me. I'm a whinger.
You're a professional whinger.
In my own particular. And Mark, when did you begin to become aware of the West End Whingers? When did they really make an impact?
The interesting thing is that there's a great thing called Google, isn't there? And you put in a name of a show, and things will come up at the top of the list. And you started to find after a while that their reviews were coming up, because they were the only reviews around, were coming up early before anybody else. And also just suddenly the word filtered out that they're very, very entertaining. I mean, they're very, very funny, whether or not you agree. I mean, the Death and the King's Horseman review that they did at the National Theatre was outright hilarious. And if anybody needs to see just how funny they are, then you just go and check.
Was there a paint never dries moment in the Death and the King's Horseman review anywhere?
That was a kind of formal thing, really, rather
the way
than
it's structured.
gags.
You don't know what Death and...
What was the verse play?
Well, it's a Nigerian play.
It was culturally insensitive.
What they did do is they wrote it as if it was one of those Nigerian scam emails trying to get you to send them money. And it was genius. And the whole thing was written in that style.
Oh, that's really
funny. Dear sir, dear wonderful sirs, we have this wonderful play at the National Theatre.
And if you deposit $1,000 in the bank account.
So, as I say, go and read it, because it's brilliant.
All right, you're in New York to whinge away. Will you be reviewing some of the shows that you're seeing while you're in town?
We already have.
All right, well, what have you reviewed, and what have you said about it?
Addams Family.
Oh, yes, tell me. I'm all ears.
What did you think? You've been very quiet about it, Michael.
That's right.
We should have led with the other ones, because you're not going to be interested in any of the others now.
No, I'm curious. Give me your West End Whinger review of the Addams Family.
Well, it was a difficult one for us. Obviously, basically the book wags its tail and barks, and the songs are anodyne and unworthy, but it's Nathan Lane and B.B. Newworth up there on the stage.
At the interval, I would have said, we don't do a star rating, we do how many glasses of wine it is, because we like to drink when we go to the theatre. Something which
you can't do in New York.
You can't do that in New York.
No, you fall asleep.
There's no pleasure in going to the theatre here. The ushers are aggressive. They open the doors and tip you out onto the street the moment it's over. Anyway, and everybody gives everything a standing ovation.
So you...
Anyway, sorry,
So you felt
I would have thought a 3-star maybe at the interval, because it made us laugh enough, I think. It was sort of raucous and vaudeville and and Bibi and Nathan were, trying to make the best of bad material. The second half was just, I thought it was dire. It was just bad number after bad number, and you could almost see them struggling with it.
I think they're defeated. They're ultimately defeated by the material.
There's great people in it. Kevin Chamberlain as Festus, terrific. Jackie Hoffman.
Jackie Hoffman
As
and
Grandma.
Lurch.
Yeah. You haven't seen it yet, have you?
I'm going to see it tonight.
Yeah, well, we've really built it up for you. It must be, you can't wait.
But I often think that the law of negative expectation will now apply.
Yeah.
I hope that
Yeah.
it will. That having been built up that I'm going to expect a complete turkey, I'm actually not going to have such a bad time. But
Phil's face is...
Well, I went with negative expectations because I'd read you. So
on a press night, you go in with well, nobody goes in with an open mind anymore, do they? I don't think that's the problem. Is that thanks to the West End Whingers, thanks to Talk on Broadway, we all have some preconceptions before we arrive. Yeah. But obviously, the critical agenda hasn't been set yet on the press night. Right. When you come after the event, as I've done now with Adam's Family, I'm expecting the worst.
Yes. Well,
you're going to get it.
Yes. All right. What else have you guys been whinging about since you've been in New York?
The handing in Spokane.
Okay.
We've been saying Spokane.
The British pronunciation.
We just call it behanding.
Christopher Walken. Did you like Chris Walken?
Yeah, it was good. It was the day we arrived and we were really tired. And,
always an excuse. Jet lag is always the excuse.
90 minutes, no intervals, so we thought we could cope with that.
Yeah.
It was like all the actors were in different plays. It was a bit weird. I don't know whether that's just because we were jet lagged, but it was like everybody was. One person was doing sitcom and one person was doing.
And you're feeling about it, Phil?
Yeah, I do like Christopher Walken, but we had an idiot sitting behind us who, before the show, was saying, "You don't call him Christopher Walken, you call him Chris Walken. Right? You don't say Robert De Niro, you say Bobby De Niro." And then he proceeded to comment all the way, "Yeah, get him. Kill him in the closet." It's just like, I mean, if it hadn't been so entertaining, I would have punched it. But then,
yes, I would have given the evil eye. But
I tried that.
Oh, really?
But it was just normally it works in London. Yeah.
I was curious. Before you came on tonight, we were in the green room, and Billy Joe Armstrong and Michael Mayer, who've done American Idiot, were here, and I introduced you to them. And I said, you really should see American Idiot. And you said, right to their faces, well, I don't think it's our kind of music. We wouldn't like it. Have you no filter?
No, it's just, I don't know, I think I blame jet lag if we hadn't been here for several days. Well, I thought it was only fair.
It's not personal.
No.
Like,
Do you see everything? Do you want to have an opinion on everything that's going on in the theatre, in the West End, or are you selective?
We are selective. We try and go and see things we think we might like, but that doesn't always work.
So you're really not driven by trying to draw attention to yourselves just by bashing everything?
Oh God, no.
We don't.
We go to the theatre always hoping to enjoy it, and if we enjoy it, we will say we enjoyed it. We're not bashing things for the sake of it.
Did you go to
It's
Shrek?
just that most of it's rubbish,
It's so true.
It just is, isn't it? You know how many 5-star shows do you see in a year? If you know.
Yeah.
Are there American musicals that have come to London that you've seen?
Yes.
For
Legally
example.
Blonde, for instance.
Yes. Now you have to explain this to me. I never liked Legally Blonde. It was not a success here.
No.
It's a big hit in London. Why is this?
It's actually the half-price booth every night. But there's an awful lot of hype around. I mean, the producer of it is a very clever person who's managed to hype it. And it did get very, very respectable notices in London. My colleagues don't, by and large, understand musicals. Is the simple truth. Legally Blonde, it's a big bubblegum piece of theatre. It's very light and insubstantial. I can see why it has an audience, and it's extremely well done. But it ain't Spring Awakening.
Thank heavens for that. It was funny.
You guys have a prejudice against new cutting-edge musicals.
Yeah, so what's wrong with old music?
So why do you like it?
Pretentious, and they try too hard, and it's like people. It's the Emperor's New Clothes. People bend over backwards.
And who cares about teenage angst? They just need a slap.
Well, Legally Blonde's hardly geriatric.
May I ask one thing? You told me you just saw Mickey Dolenz in Hairspray.
Oh, we didn't see him. No, he
you
was
know
in
he's
it, but
there.
we didn't see him.
All right, so I'll cut the whole thing. Right.
Brilliant question.
Thank you.
Leave that in.
That's why they pay me the big bucks. Okay.
We've got to wrap it up. Have you had any awkward, confrontational moments with some of the big powers in the theater who now know who you are and have been upset at something you've written?
I wouldn't say that this person was a big power in the theatre.
So it has. Who is the person?
Oh yeah, we can't. Oh,
well, what was the conversation?
Don't lift the lid off that.
Okay.
Tell us what happened, though.
No, we can't really say.
Well, yeah, we can. Yeah, no, it was a designer theatre designer, who took exception to our opinions and protested. Well, that's all we need to say about
Physically?
it, really. No.
But did you meet this person somewhere?
Yes.
I sent
did.
Andrew along. I sort of held him as a shield, really, and cowered in the corner. Yeah.
Let me give you a little bit of advice. Being beaten up by people, very good career move. When
really?
David Laveau, the British director, punched me out because of Fiddler on the Roof, my name was everywhere. It was fabulous.
So was your face.
So was my face. So don't shy away from it. All right, I want to thank the West End Whingers, Andrew and Phil, very powerful, dangerous, feared guys in the West End. And representing old media, our good friend Mark Shenton from the Sunday Express. Andrew, Phil, and Mark, thanks for being our guest tonight on Theatre Talk.
Thank you
and
very
I
much.
expect good whinging about this show.
Oh, don't you worry.
We've started.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theatre Talk for their significant contribution to this production.
Theatre Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theatre Talk. Thank you and good night.